is an impressive panel. I think we would all agree. You're in for some really amazing stories, lessons, insights into the DNA of a true leader. So I asked the three of you to give us a few journey points about your story so the audience can really get to know you. What got you started, pivot points, what's the fuel that drives you? So Toni, why don't you start us out?
I thought we were going the other way there. Okay.
We can.
I was ready for that pivot. Well, look, first I'm a verb in a family of nouns, okay? I grew up in a family of soldier, doctor, teacher, and I just didn't fit in the noun side of that. I'm much more of a verb on how and what I do. So the family calls and the family meetings are always interesting because the verbs have helped define all the other family members and the nouns, and they still try to figure out exactly what I do and how I get paid and whether I'm changing the world. So kind of knew I had to start to reshape who I was because I didn't have a clean noun to sort of explain who I was and what I did. A military brat, Army brat, probably moved 11 times before I graduated from high school, quickly had to learn how to adapt in that sort of military environment, which either sort of creates an amazing resilience or sometimes crushes spirits and families. So that's how I came up. Look, I'm a child of two very traditional sort of civil rights paths for African Americans. My mom a teacher, my dad a soldier, but they were also first twos. They were the first African Americans to do things. So as a child, I grew up with a very strong sense of purpose, expectation, and really actually representing every aspect of my community. Back then, there was no psychological testing to say it was too much pressure to tell an 8-year-old you represent all black people when you take the test. Even if they had it, my mom might not have followed it. My dad didn't quite understand when you said you represent all women, no pressure, at 10, that perhaps that might have been a bit much. But a lot of us that came to sort of twice as good growing up and feeling like that was our piece. So across the journey, I would say it was very quick to be, as a child of public servants, that the prayer and mantra as a Christian family was, to whom much is given, much is required. And so we had this expectation that with the amazing safety net and the strength of this family that we would have to give back and extend much more. The journey sort of pivot points in terms of career, probably most framing, I was an economist by training coming out of Princeton. I then went to the Peace Corps and lived 3 years on the equator. And probably in that, somewhere in that continuum is where I learned about personal bias. I learned about what it was to be an African American in Africa, trying to fit into an African culture, feeling quite American and missing Krispy Kreme donuts deeply. Very deeply, possibly concerningly deeply. And so I say that to say that I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about culture, learned a lot about living in a village, in a polygamous village, what the strength and the power of women in that environment. But going from that then into sort of professional life, my next probably phase was really around going into parenting. I was an early parent and really had to figure out, both as a parent in my first marriage, a single parent, and then in a blended family, every aspect of parenting I've probably had to engage with. And our 5 kids and 6 grandkids, now I still look back and say those seasons of what we've been learning as parents. Probably the last piece is on the technology piece, which is a portfolio discussion. To get to know me is to know that I operate almost everything like a portfolio. I started my career in management consulting, started then going to Unisys and doing hardware, and I see almost all my former employers here, but at Unisys, at CGI doing system integration, at Microsoft doing software platform, and now cloud, AI, quantum, and emerging technologies. So I've had the full portfolio, and I think it's probably defines me most is that almost everything I do, from trying to manage the kids and grandkids, my wonderful husband, being in 4 generations, having parents that are living, some of you feel that sort of 4-generational pull, that's all about portfolio. I give by portfolio. My philanthropy is all done by portfolio. And so my day life and my evening life have all come together around this construct of balanced portfolio. So that's sort of it started off and sort of my mantra now with my own kids is the race isn't given to the swift, but to the one who continues to the end. So we're kind of moving down that path as family.
Very good. Well, let's go down the line. Urvashi.
Yeah. I would would say for me, a lot of my character has been shaped by the immigrant experience. I moved to the US with my family as an adolescent, which is a very difficult time to be an outsider. And, and that's where a lot of the lessons in grit and toughness and resilience and confidence came from. And I watched my parents be immigrants and entrepreneurs, and to operate from that place of boldness and confidence. And that is really what I think as a child I thought, well, that's how you're supposed to be. That's how you operate in the world. So fast forward, I started my career as an investigator for NASD, the parent company of NASDAQ, went to business school, was doing consulting work for an economic consulting firm, on partner track, working insane hours, et cetera. My husband was doing the same for another consulting firm. And we had this bold idea that, we can do this for ourselves. We could create a company that is inspiring and one that does right by its customers and its employees and is an example in the community, and have the freedom of purpose and time and resources. It was a bold idea. We sat on it for a while because it was risky. We had promising careers, certainty in what that looked like. And so we sat on it for a while, and a couple of years later, we decided if we're ever going to do it, if we're ever going to take a chance and bet on ourselves, it would be now, because we didn't have kids, we didn't have a lot of liabilities, and what's the worst that could happen? We can go back to jobs. So that's how it started, and it's the sense of responsibility keeps growing. And it's exciting, and it keeps demanding more and more confidence. I read somewhere recently that an entrepreneur's biggest asset is their confidence. And I think that's just so true. It's something that has to be actively managed, because when I think about 100 employees and an average size of 4, that's 400 people that you're responsible for. It's a great reason to get out of bed in the morning. And that sense of responsibility grows, and it's extremely inspirational.
Thank you. Sue.
Okay. So I guess I begin my story as I was a senior in high school. I went to an all-girls school, and this was back in the 60s, so I'm dating myself. And I like math. The benefit of an all-girls school is that everybody's a leader because you don't have to compete with the other guys or the guys. So you have that confidence that is just sort of there. But I was talking to the guidance counselor, and well, what do you like? I like math. You could be a math teacher. I said, no, I don't think so. Nothing against teachers, but I knew what I didn't want to do, and the question was trying to figure out how to take what I like to do and find a program that would allow me to do that. And so I found this program it was a major in computer science at a school in Ohio. I grew up in Milwaukee. This was a school in Ohio. I said, okay, I had to have a math minor, and I could learn about computers. This is back in 1968. And they were sort of this thing that was, kind of people talked about, but what does that mean, and what are you going to do? And so I found this program at a college day, and I said, oh, that looks good. I applied. That was the only school I applied to. I don't think anybody here would ever advise their kids to only apply to one school, but my parents were I was a first-generation college student in my family, and what do we know? We didn't know. So, and the first time I visited the school was when my mother dropped me off at the dorm. So I was really kind of going on a lot of trust or a lot of ignorance, and I'm not sure which, but it worked out. And what I learned about computer science is that what I really liked about it was not so much the coding, because I discovered in my first classes that everybody else who was in the same freshman classes all had coded before. They all were sitting on the teletypes typing basic programs, and I had none of that, so that was a real discovery. But you also I found that it was for me, as I matriculated through computer science, it was really the analysis, the systems analysis part of it that really excited me, because I was really out there asking people what they needed, and also trying to anticipate what they might need, and put on a human-centered approach to that, and be the translator between the people who were sitting on the other side of the CRT and the programmers behind them that were trying to translate it into something that was going to be a useful and usable and used technology. And that kind of human-centered aspect of it is also something that I think, as an analyst, is a skill that women bring to the table. We are outstanding listeners, and so I took that listening and was able to translate that into the requirements for the technology, but also kind of a view of, well, what are the things that I want to be doing in my career? So that pivot, that left turn to a school that I had never visited and starting in a program that I knew very little about, led me to a career, eventually to graduate school. It led me to my husband. I worked for him. He managed the computer lab. I endeared myself to him by dropping a tray of cards. Fortunately, they had the 8-digit sequence number on the back that you could run it through the machine, and they all come back magically sorted. Yeah, and the tables were flipped, actually, over the course of my career, and he's worked for me a couple times. We're still married. It's only been 46 years, but we managed to survive. Yeah. So why did I start a company? So that was 25 years ago. And for me, I had been working in a firm that was a defense contractor. I was doing different kinds of work with them. And a former colleague from graduate school, who was now chief ergonomist at Ford, came to me with a project. And it was not the kind of project I could do in the company that I was working at. It would have, I mean, their overhead and their load and all that kind of stuff would have meant that I would have had 2 hours instead of a couple hundred hours. And so, and plus there was sort of an unease in the position I was in. It was one of those companies back 25 years ago where if you didn't brief generals, if you didn't have a military suit in your closet, and if you didn't basically only wear pants and never wear a skirt, you weren't going to make it to the next level in the organization. And so I said, okay, this is a chance for me to do something different. And clearly there was the support of family is required. Support of other people that are in your network is important to do that as well. But it was a start, and I think. You know, to your comment, once you start and you realize that it's more than just yourself that you're feeding, it's a fear of failure and an understanding of responsibility that you have a lot of people that you are responsible for. And so failure sort of becomes not an option. And so you just kind of, you know, it's like one step in front of the other, and you keep going, and then suddenly you have a 25-year-old company with 100 people, and you're doing great and wonderful things. And so it's been a series, what I would say, it's a series of left turns, and you have to be willing to kind of make those left turns as you progress in your career. It's not like a direct path.
Yeah. So before we start our conversation, I just have 2 requests. One is for Joy. If there's any way to move the podium behind me, that would be great, because I feel like we're leaving half of the room out visibility-wise. Sorry, guys. And our backs are to some of you as well. And secondly, questions. You have the index cards. Go ahead and write them down and hold up your hand. Volunteers will collect them and hand them to me toward the end of our conversation. The center actually, 33 years ago, the first leadership conference was called Conversation with Great Leaders. And we rolled back the clock to start that theme again, and here we are. So Toni, relate to us one of your personal experiences as you were going through your career early on, an experience that shaped you into the kind of leader you are today.
Look, I think you've heard a theme on whether you're an entrepreneur or you're moving within, you're working for other companies, and you're making decisions about your career, left or right. These left turns, I love that construct, or these decisions to step out, they happen, again, whether your step out is fully entrepreneurial or you're taking care of your tribe, whatever that tribe is. You know, the movement for us from one Washington to another which was basically my decision to join Microsoft, was a decision to leave 5 kids and a needy Cocker Spaniel. I'm not sure which one was the tougher decision. And it was a decision to ask my husband to leave CBS News after 22 years. It was a decision to leave all that he had grown up with, and a decision, and as a military brat, I've already shared with you that, you know, my movement and my velocity, that wasn't the challenge. It was the tribe. It was a family vote. Brothers, sisters, everybody got to engage. The sort of learning there, and what had already, what I hadn't realized, and I think back now, is what had already impressioned that decision and that opportunity was a decision made many years prior. Early on in my career, I had made the decision to liken my career to a staircase, to vertical and horizontal decisions that I would make. Vertical, to challenge myself with a lot of new information, to go into something that was way, a real push for me intellectually, a real push for me organizationally, a real challenge, leadership. And then horizontally, to apply that, to apply it, to never leave an organization or leave a season of life without applying that which I had just learned. And some of that was, you know, Princeton was the economics. There were 3 women in economics when I got my degree in Princeton, and I was told to leave about 3 times in terms of that specific field. So it was an intellectual challenge up. I was applying much of what I had learned when I joined the Peace Corps in that small village in West Africa. So this idea of vertical challenge to horizontal application and vertical to the next vertical challenge, I had already been on that path with every decision around the career. So when the Microsoft opportunity came, it was another vertical climb. I had been applying and had just been promoted. Generally, you get promoted on the horizontal when you're applying, and had just, you know, gotten to a very senior position that I thought was the end. And many people said, "Hey, you've already arrived. Where are you going?" It was that next vertical that I was looking for, and I was surrounding myself with people who had made conscious decisions to not stay in any vertical too long or any horizontal too long. And so that decision, which was probably the biggest career and personal decision I had made, that fundamentally took me away from family, took us to a state of Washington that is a very different place than Washington, D.C. They're still figuring out kale out there as a new vegetable, which was concerning since we've had it for a long time on the East Coast, but it's kind of trendy out there. And so, but it was, I mean, diversity was different. My husband was running down black people at Whole Foods. Like, it was seriously, literally running down black people trying to find them at Whole Foods. And so it was, no, I'm very serious here. So I say that to say, it was a big challenge, but that challenge had already been impressioned by this career decision of how we wanted to live and how I wanted to challenge myself personally. So I think the example I say is, you can look back and say, hey, how did I end up here? But a lot of the stories I just heard, some of the, whether it's immigrant upbringing or living in the defense world of what it would take to get ahead, you get impressioned early on. You can look 10 years down the road and figure out you didn't just get there. You made decisions early on that set a frame and a mindset for how you wanted to live and how you wanted to grow your career. And it's great now to look back and say that's what really affected that decision.
And that was certainly a big risk that
Huge
you
risk.
took.
Yeah.
And Urvashi, you and I spoke about risk, and you've illustrated taking a risk to start a company. But I think you're also someone who takes a risk on people, and I'd like you to just chat about your philosophy.
I think people are, you know, there are 3 things that I think about every day, and it's people, 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 because it's really not what you do, but who you do it with. It's people who you can have a vision, but it's people who you need to bring together to help, the right people who will help you execute the vision. So it's, you know, it's really important in our company for us, for example, to make sure that there's a very good values match. You know, we have found that somebody could be really, really good at what they do, but if there's a values mismatch, it just doesn't work and it's painful. And on the flip side, one of the biggest learning for me as an entrepreneur and as a leader has been to sever the ties sooner than I have been able to do in the past. And that's because, you know, you invest in people, you build relationships, you want them to be successful, but sometimes it's very clear early on that there are some just fundamental values mismatch that will not be good in the long run. So, you know, so what I've learned is actually the compassionate thing to do is to sever ties early. Because if you're not happy, that probably means the employee isn't happy, and it's compassionate to let them go if this is not the right role for them.
Yeah, yeah. And so you and I talked about risk and accomplishment as well, and you know, you've got a good perspective. I'm sure you'd like to share some of the big things you took a risk on.
Well, I think from a people standpoint, to echo your point, you know, the adage is you hire slow and you fire fast. And over time, I mean, I think over 25 years, I've had a lot of examples where I didn't do that. And so, you know, you learn eventually. Some people are slower than others, but we learn eventually how to get through that. And also, what we've tried to do is be really intentional about codifying, to your point, you know, what are the values, what are the behaviors that we're looking for? Because you can train for talent, but you can't train for the behaviors. And if you don't get those behaviors right, and that requires one to actually be very intentional about describing what are those behaviors. So when we interview people, we interview for culture fit, and then we interview for talent. And so that's two parts of the same person. And the thing that I find really heartwarming from my standpoint is when I hear from employees who are so grateful that we took a chance on them. Mm-hmm. That they didn't necessarily have an exact talent, they didn't have any kind of talent fit, but they had the, you hire because they exhibit a lot of other things that you think you want and you think are going to be a good fit. And you know, why would we hire a practicing litigant attorney as a consultant? He wanted to make a career choice, and he's proven to be an outstanding consultant. He has a great brain, a great thinking process, and you can train him on the 50,000 acronyms of the FAA. It's not that hard. But you can't get somebody who has the right skills and can you know, really kind of represent your company in an effective way. And so I think that you know, the people part is really important, and getting it right is a constant process. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. Yeah, and so this goes to the values, right? You're setting a culture within your own companies. Let's start with Toni. You know, what to you is sort of that most important core value, and how do you embody it?
Yeah, no, I think knowing your own and having those set before challenges come is part of the conversation, because you know it's a core value when it has to be tested. You know, if it hasn't been tested, you know, it's a nice idea until it gets tested. Look, I feel pretty strong about probably three that lift. I've got a sort of a slide of probably 5 or 6, but probably 3 that are pretty important to me. One is I have a real strong sense of purpose-driven living, purpose-driven companies, purpose-driven activity. You know, technology is the industry I find myself in, but I still see it as a means to an end, and the end is not the coolest device or widget. It's always about what it can do for, so it's a sort of applied innovation mindset. So it's also about purpose. If I succeed in one direction, whether it be revenue or quality or innovation, and I don't succeed on social impact and change, to me it's not success at the end of the day. So purpose-driven. I think another one that sounds probably interesting to go along with this is personal boundaries. I've had to learn that over time, how to set personal boundaries. You know, my guy, in our day that we got married, I don't really care what the stock price is. Microsoft stocks look pretty good right now, but whatever the stock price is, that's my day. That's my guy. He's going to be there longer than I work for Microsoft. So, you know, our anniversary is a personal boundary. You know, the company kind of knows. You can call me if you want. Go for it. Good luck on that. Good luck on that. So, you know, there's some moments. I just had a grandchild 2 weeks ago. We were in the middle of a financial review. I got the call. She's going into labor. I was like, hey, guys, hope the numbers look good. I'll talk to you later. And you could see the whole team was like, Yeah, I mean, but you know, the number, we're gonna close the quarter. I'm like, I know, and yeah, I'll see. I'm still heading down to the hospital now, and so whatever those are, setting personal boundaries has been part of being. I can be even more purpose-driven when I've got personal boundaries and feel respected, and then I do really, I do feel. It's a challenge. I think it's a challenge. It's something I do a lot of coaching on, and I don't say I do it perfectly because I've done everything wrong to get to this point. But I will say that personal boundaries is something I'd like to see more women, particularly in the workforce too. The last one I'll just say is surgical feedback. It's about firing fast and hiring slow. I just find feedback that is surgical, that is absolutely pointed, does not create a scarlet letter. But really good feedback is something that I have had throughout my career. Real straight, honest, direct feedback in the moment, real time. But I have found that there are many environments, whether it's the nice, nasty, the passive aggressive, whatever it is, we just don't know how to do it well. And surgical feedback is a gift to people when you're being honest and when your intent is positive. So I believe deeply in surgical. My team will tell you about how that feels, but I hope it's been a good experience because surgery should be about recovery and growth, not about damaging people.
Yeah. So Urvashi, you have 2 young children, and we've just talked about the challenge of balancing it all, and you're running a company on top of it. Talk about some of your core values and how do you balance? Do you have balance? How do you balance?
Well, one of my core values in general, in life, at work, at home, is integrity. You know, I think it's all about relationships, whether I'm dealing with people at work, whether I'm dealing with clients, or whether I'm dealing with my kids. They have to believe that I keep my word. And that sometimes in the short run can be very tempting to go against that because there are very nice opportunities that you can jump on, but it really comes back to bite you in the long run. It's a small world, and people have to be able to trust your word. I think that's key. As far as balance is concerned, it's really, really hard. I have a 4-year-old and an almost 2-year-old. And one of my non-negotiables, which is to be there when my kids go to bed at night, it doesn't happen 100% of the time. It also means I'm not hanging out at Capitol Grill every night, right? But that's a priority for me. It does help that my husband and I are business partners, so between the two of us, we can, rebalance work, home. There is some room there. We can probably have a whole panel on being business partners with your spouse, right?
Yeah.
But I think just being very organized, I do a lot of at a tactical level. There's a weekly planning that happens on Sunday nights. There's a daily planning that happens in the mornings. Things are very organized. I know exactly where I'm supposed to be when. And do the best that I can,
Mm-hmm. So Sue, you've done it all as well. You've raised children, you've raised the company. What are you most proud of, and what are some of those values that you really embrace?
So I think the value that I embrace in the company, and it was, so it's the word leadership, and it really is a verb. It's not a noun. It's not where you are on the org chart. It's not where you sit in the office. It's what you bring to your day and to your team and to the company. And so we in the company are very intentional about finding opportunities and having employees find opportunities where they can demonstrate leadership, whether it's a client project or something that's internally driven. So our corporate social responsibility effort in the company is totally employee driven. They come to the executives when they say, well, we want to have matching dollars of blah, blah, blah for this, or is this particular initiative consistent with the direction that as a company we want to sponsor? But in terms of the inputs, the insights, and the ongoing motivation behind it, it's employee-led. And it's been a tremendous recruiting tool for us as a company, not just because it's the demonstration of leadership, but it's with today's workforce, you have to be making a commitment to the community, not just to your clients. And so I think that that's been something that's been really, really strong. I think the one thing that makes me well, there's lots of things in having a company for 25 years that makes one proud. I think most recently is, so we celebrated 25 years, and so last month was kind of a bunch of milestones for me. So I transitioned operating management of the company to my two of my partners. And so they take on all of the operating, the execution, and all that kind of stuff. And then last week, no, it was the week before, I forget, the end of March, I actually sold the remainder, I sold my shares of the company to them as well. So they are in it fully right now. And the interesting story is that, well, so I was at a non-retirement party for me because I haven't really fully retired. But somebody observed that basically one woman had to have two men take her place. Yes. But I think it's being able to for me, it was transitioning from a legacy standpoint. I didn't want to sell to an outsider. I wanted to preserve the culture, what we've built, and the different attributes of the company. And the best way to do that was to have an internal transition. And I was fortunate in that I cultivated two senior, well, a whole leadership team, but there were two who were also in a position and interested in doing the equity transaction as well, because I wasn't going to give it away. So.
Yeah.
Yep.
So succession planning, important piece, right?
Yep.
Let's talk about that, but also about the next generation of leaders. I think things have changed since we started. You're a little bit behind us age-wise, but things have changed a bit. Let's talk about, Toni, a little bit about your thoughts for the next generation of leadership, some advice you might impart on them.
Advice. So last year when you asked me, you asked for one word of advice. I think last time you asked me about this, and I said Merlot, and that.
And you don't know how often I've quoted you?
I'm still getting feedback on that particular bit, but I still find it to be quite helpful. I think what I look at, we have 4 generations in the workforce, and when I think about the skill sets that we're finding, and whether you look at it in terms of artificial intelligence or assisted intelligence or autonomous intelligence or augmented humanity, or however you want to look at the new wave of work. I do a lot of work on the future of work, and this ability to adapt to these 4 generations is a broader definition of diversity and inclusion than we've even had to date. And that fluency, that agility, to be able to move across a workforce, whether it's your workforce as the entrepreneur or you're in a larger workforce, I think is going to become an immediate, and is in fact we're seeing as an immediate skill set. Combination of adaptability, of understanding cultural cues, of how to inspire, how to lead, how to instruct. I find that to be something, and I don't want to say, I find myself saying women may be more attuned to that. Then I check myself to say, is that some kind of weird bias I have? But I have found that that is a skill set. The engagement with technology and the ability to operate in a collaborative environment where technology is meant to unlock some form of human potential. I find that to be something that's going to be a skill set going forward, where I see current leaders are challenged. Whether it's the tech industry, you name the industry, they're challenged in what this new demographic, this new dynamic is going to be. I also think this sort of self-care, self-awareness that is growing so much. I mean, I hear women, when we started, I would love to have had the conversations that we have in this room, when I started. There was like no one to talk to. You were the only one in the room. You kind of looked, you had your slights every day. You felt marginalized. You weren't sure how, and we just didn't have the wealth of this discussion. And you see another one, you just kind of run to her, like my husband running to black people. And well, I mean, you just tried to find some kind of connection, or you were just trying really hard to figure it out. I notice now that we're so much more open to a sense of our story and telling our story, knowing yourself and knowing your triggers. I did the bias training, this whole conversation of pausing and knowing where you are and self-talk. And I think that's going to be really critical going forward because there are going to be missteps. But I think if there's one characteristic that I'm actually hiring for, please do not send this is not a call for resumes. Please, oh, she's hiring for across Microsoft, it's a big deal for our CEO, is empathy. And it's an interesting characteristic to hire for. It's an interesting characteristic to check yourself on and to try to build as a culture. But this conversation about empathy and the ability to extend that sense of not challenging everyone's intent, but accepting positive intent initially until it's proven differently. That's really, to me, going to be the skill set, the competency, the capability in leadership that's going to define the next decade is empathy.
And if I may, I think I would not check yourself too strongly on saying that's a characteristic that women are very strong in. And so I think to New Zealand and to their prime ministers, Jacinda Ardern, and her response to the terrorist attacks there was something that you wouldn't see here today in this country. And it was her vulnerability, her empathy, her feeling that she really wanted to convey to people that she hears them, she feels for them. And we don't want to get too mushy about it, but I think there's a value in feeling like you've got that emotional connection with people, and you can go a lot further with that than you can with fear-mongering.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. So Urvashi, what are your thoughts around the biggest challenges today that are facing leaders? And you've got some young ones coming up, so you're probably thinking fast forward. What do you want to impart to them?
Right. Well, I think, we've talked about this in the various sessions and here as well. It used to be that leadership comes with power and authority. And I think with millennials and the Gen Zs, I think, it's about being able to influence them. It's about getting them to buy in. It's coaching and mentoring. I think that's the leadership style that's probably more effective with those generations. So I think just kind of coming at it from the old approach of, because I'm in this office and I think you have to earn the title and you have to be worthy of the role, and you have to approach it from a sense of humility and responsibility rather than ownership and power.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation, and I think we've talked a little bit about hierarchy in flat organizations, and you have some thoughts, Sue.
Well, I think a disservice that parents do sometimes is instilling a sense of entitlement and an expectation. And when if an employee gives me feedback that says I don't see my career path, my question is, well, you really need to own it, and we will provide all of the mechanisms through career coaches and employee engagement managers and lots of different mechanisms, as well as training and team-oriented opportunities to lead. But I think there needs to be a sense of, I own my left turns. I'm going to see these signs and I'm going to take advantage of them. One of the things that we've instituted, sort of similar to what you were saying in terms of horizontal and vertical, is we don't have a career path, we have a career lattice. And those different nodes are designed to give you different experiences and different things that add to your confidence and your skill set and your, like the quiver in whatever you're shooting at. So it's an opportunity to really kind of broaden the experience versus feeling like there's just like one path, and if I check the boxes, I'm going to get there, because that's not going to cut it in my mind in terms of how you're going to grow.
No, I love that. This generational discussion, I think, is also starting to occur. This idea of the setting realistic demands, this like what the organization's supposed to do for. And look, we created a little bit of a goodie bag generation. Everybody gets the goodie bag. Everybody's kind of a winner, which, you know, there's a point of reality that we need to have. And look, we've got to be courageous and authentic in our dialogue with some new entrants into the workforce of what it takes.
Yep.
How much work it takes, what the expectations, because some of you may or may not be dealing with some really amplified expectations that are coming into the workforce. I mean, I get work-life balance, all of it, but some of these expectations are not going to be able to be addressed by employers and shouldn't be, possibly. And that's a dialogue I still see us struggling with in terms of setting some realistic expectations. Maybe somebody in the room are dealing with.
Yeah, definitely an evolution that we're seeing, and a clear delineation between the workforce generations. And it'd be so interesting, someone mentioned earlier the Gen Zs that are coming up kind of being like that other traditionalist, perhaps.
Circling back.
And it's circling back, and soon we'll have all five in the workplace. Be fascinating. So let's take a moment and talk about failure, because we all have been there, right? So Toni, reflect, I mean, all of us. Not to pick on
Failure. Toni,
Every single day.
let's Toni talk about failure. So, you know, not moving quickly enough and decisively enough, probably, you know, I can capstone my 30-year career as times where I should have just moved. In fact, coaches, I have a number of mentors of mine in the room, coaching, but just this fear of making and just the analysis paralysis, let me just get a little more information and maybe I'll talk and get a few more nodes of it. And it wasn't about a gut call. I probably had the right 80% threshold to make the decision, but boy, I sat on that thing and I didn't hire that person, or I didn't fire that person, and I can see it. I can just go back and track every one of those as what in the world, what was the fear basis? And they're generally that. Fear of exposure, imposter theory, you name it. You know, you don't really deserve that job. You should look at that decision, that crazy gal, you know, that kind of fear piece going on in my head, that voice. So I think it's been more of fear of just not moving. I think the other piece is, and I've gone back to check this on a couple of times, I feel pretty good about coming back on feedback with people who I question their intent. Like if I don't question your intent, and I try not to question any intent initially, we just move forward positively and you kind of let a lot of things go. But when you're questioning the intent of behavior, and behavior is discriminatory or inappropriate, I found myself ready to do that for my team faster than I was ready to do that for myself. So if my team was disrespected, it was like, get out of the way. Don't be confused by Ivy League education. I'm about to light you up. Light you up. But when it was me personally, I didn't, like it was my kids or my family, I'm all in. So one of my mentors, peers, pulled me aside and said, look, every time you feel like maybe there's a slight, I want to put you in the center. And then I want your mind to go to, they did something to your team. I want you to bring the heat of they did something to your team, but it's you in the pronoun position, because I didn't bring it the same. And so I go back and think those were some decisions early on that I would love to reconstruct, but I've learned through some of those failures, you know, how to create ways in my own mind, a little bit of mind shifting, so that I can feel the same empathy for self that I do for my team, and the same protectiveness for myself as I do for my team.
Wow. Yeah, really powerful, very insightful. I think we all have those blind spots, let's call them, right? Yep. Urvashi, how about your failure, or moments of failure?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think women tend to struggle with more than men is this thing called perfectionism. You know, it's, I think if things aren't perfect, they feel like they're all wrong, you know? And I think we need to go a little bit easier on ourselves, and while still challenging ourselves and acknowledging where things could have gone better. That's a lesson that's been hard for me to learn, you know, which is I need to be more objective about my own performance and solicit objective feedback from people who are in a position to give me feedback that would be helpful to me. You know, there are just so many things that are imperfect and things that could have been done better leading people. Many of them are around leading people, and especially different styles and different kinds of people, and people need different approaches. And so if I tried to apply the same approach to different people and it didn't work so well, it felt like I really blew that one, you know. Most of the examples I can think of are around leading people, and so that's one of the questions that I've been sitting with is, as my organization grows and develops, how do I need to grow and develop, you know, in that role?
Yeah, and that kind of gets us to a question: what are you thinking of lately as a leader? You know, what's sort of the latest thing on your mind?
Retirement.
Good answer.
Or non-retirement.
My non-retirement. Yes, I have a couple initiatives that I'm working on, but it's what is the next chapter? And sometimes that's why CEOs don't want to give the reins up, because they don't know what the next thing is. That's how you identify yourself, and so how do you get beyond that? But I think you know, we were. The question was about, you know, risk and failure, and I think for me to look back, for me it was finding the right, going outside of the company. I wasn't going to get feedback from within the company. I needed to go outside and finding the right kind of mentor group or CEO group that was going to be able to be honest with me and give me that kind of feedback. It would have saved me hundreds of thousands of dollars. I got myself in a situation with a real estate attorney, and I was using my government contracts attorney as a real estate attorney. They are not the same. You need to go to the right specialists. You need to identify who are the right people that are going to help you in different situations, and not say, well, that's the easy button, well, that's a wrong button. And so figuring out how, and that's where the other peer groups are very helpful, whether at whatever level of the organization you're at, whatever level of your career you're at, finding people who are going to be honest with you and give you the feedback and also help you to go to the next level, I think is really important.
Yeah. Well, we're down to the last question. I can't believe it already. I'm getting the hook on time. So I'm going to ask all three of you the same question. If you could have a cup of coffee or a glass of Merlot, or the wine, the beverage of your choice, with a great leader, past or present, who might it be, and what would you like to chat about? So whoever's ready first, go.
So, okay, I'll start, because I was thinking about this, and I would say Katharine Graham. Not because Meryl Streep played her wonderfully in The Post. You know, we share some things. We both went to all-girls school. She went to Madeira, not quite, but, and she worked for her father's company, who happened to be the owner of the Washington Post, but I worked for my dad's company, but it was a little bit different. But what she did, she was the first woman publisher. She technically was the second, but she was the first in the 20th century. In 1972, she was the first woman named to Fortune's top 500 CEOs. And what she did at that time, given the politics and the financial issues she was facing, because she was taking the Post public, I would sit down with her and I'd say, what did you draw on to make those leadership decisions that put you out there, got you in the crosshairs of a president, but let you move forward with your team to allow them to really change the course of the country? And I think that she, in starting with a lack of self-confidence that she said she had, kind of being able to kind of work through that and lead the Post into being what I would say was, at that time under her tenure, was a truly international publication. So I think she's the one I would talk to.
I picked a couple.
You
I wanted to talk to them about different things. So the first one that came to mind, I thought of Rosa Parks and just that source of courage and inspiration. What did you draw upon? Oprah Winfrey, I've been so impressed with her and just the ability to handle criticism and just the sphere of influence that she's been able to have. And Bill and Melinda Gates on navigating the business partners and spouse area.
That would be a good one. Yeah. I think with a lot of money, you can probably
you can figure it out.
You can pay
have a lot of Merlot, and it kind of goes like that.
I love that. I'll probably break ranks here because probably the public and I have two public for me still would have to be Nelson Mandela. There is probably no, there's probably no leader, maybe because of personal mantra and watching the lesson of forgiveness, to take an entire country through a forgiveness path, and what he just personally endured. I still have not seen that model yet in terms of that form of leadership, and it sort of aligns with a personal mantra I have around forgiveness. It's a verb and it's an action, and it's the most powerful action I think on the planet, is the ability to forgive, and the least human inspired, meaning we don't like to do it. It's very hard to do. So probably Nelson. Probably the person I'd interview is Emily Hawks Jackson, who is my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. Because now at this age, when I look at what she lived now, I didn't appreciate growing up in the Deep South and born in Danville, Virginia, and being a preacher's wife, and all of being a wet nurse, being the help for a white family, never having the name Mrs. in front of her, never having her own title, how important it is to my mom to be called Mrs., as now I know, related to my grandmother, never little children calling her Emma, and what that meant. And just, if I could interview her now and thank her for what she endured to produce this amazing family that I see now, and my brothers, and say, I'd love to just go back in time and know the strength. I didn't see it as strength when I was growing up. In fact, I kind of thought she was quiet. The guys ate first. She wanted the men in our family to eat first. She would eat last. There were things I didn't understand culturally, and I just kind of thought she was like born in a time capsule. Like, I thought there was something wrong with her. I was like, what is wrong with grandma? But, is she in our family? Is she an imposter? And I say that with great respect now for, good Lord, what that woman went through and what she built, and the strength of that, as a black Southern woman at a time where she had almost no definition of dignity. She had to build that all, and she had to then help us prepare to live in that world. I'd love 10 minutes to bring her back on the planet, talk to her.
Mm. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. 3 such different leaders. Thank you.